Welcome to our program, Astronomy for Everyone. With me in the studio tonight is Ken Burton, past president and member of the Warren Astronomical Society. Ken, welcome to our program.
Thank you very much, Don.
Our program tonight is all about Galileo. Now, while most folks have heard about Galileo, they may not be aware that this time right now, early January 2010, is the 400th anniversary of Galileo's discovery of the 4 largest moons of Jupiter, which is why we're bringing you this program at this time. Now, Ken, most people are aware of Galileo. They've heard his name, but they probably don't know much about him. Can you tell us a bit about his life, especially starting with his early life and education?
Right. He was born in 1564. Galileo was born to a nobility family. Wasn't terribly rich, but they were nobility. His father, Vincenzo, was a music theorist and a lutenist of great renown, and he was the eldest sibling of 6, and that's crucial to his life as time goes along, because when his father dies in 1591, he has to take over the head of the family, and we'll get to that in a second. Right. And I've done some notes here, and of course we have some slides for you as well. There we go. How about that? In 1575, they moved to Florence, actually, and he's educated at a monastery in Vallombrosa. He was originally going to be a priest, but his father took him out before his novitiate year and said, that's not what you're going to be. And in 1581, he became a student at the University of Pisa and stayed there until 1585. At the end of his time there, this great mathematician, Astronomy Ricci, which I think we have something on him. By the way, going back to his time at Pisa, he discovered very, very early that he didn't like what Aristotle had said. Excuse me. He was more an Archimedean than he was against Aristotle, and that started to get him in trouble with the church as time went along. That was very, very crucial to it. Mm-hmm. At his time there, he was doing a lot of work with falling bodies. Aristotle thought that they increased, the heavier they were, the faster they fell, and Galileo proved that that wasn't correct. And he didn't drop the things from the Tower of Pisa like this myth says, probably not. Mm-hmm. He also discovered the pendulum, and that was very, very, very important to his later life in that he helped others with problems with the pendulum, like the beat and so on and so forth, of the heart. Ricci talked to his father, Vincenzo, to tell him that Galileo really needed to be a mathematician, not a doctor. And it took him a year to get him to do that, to allow him to do that. He invented the hydrostatic balance in 1586, and what we'll do is we'll move right along. There's a picture of Mr. Ricci, who was Astronomy Ricci, a great mathematician, again, like I said, and really helped Galileo along in his early studies. From 1585 to 1589, Galileo gave private lessons in math, and after he withdrew from the University of Pisa without a degree, he gave lectures and became very, very popular amongst the mathematicians of the world. He was a brilliant man.
You mentioned earlier that his father had wanted him to be a doctor. It sounds like his father had a great deal of influence in young Galileo's life.
Probably made him an experimental scientist and a father of modern science. I think his father was the influential point, because he did work with him on tensions of strings with regard to the lute and so on and so forth to get different pitches. And surely Galileo either worked with him or knew that his father was doing that musical theory work.
Interesting. What other types of inventions and discoveries did Galileo have in his life?
He invented the military compass, the geometric compass. He actually invented a very, very primitive thermometer. He invented the compound microscope. And of course, he improved the telescope to its greatest point. Now, what happened to him key-wise was when he became the chair of mathematics at the University of Pisa and stayed there for 3 years. And then after he was there for 3 years, he got into some arguments with the other professors and decided to leave it. And And he went back to Florence. His father passes away in 1591, and in 1592 he gets appointed the professor of mathematics at the University of Padua. Gets a 3-year contract, and actually he stays there till 1610. Now in the interim, in 1595 he explains the tides. He understands how the tides work. By the way, he never thought the moon and the sun had anything to do with the tides, but he thought that the Earth's rotation had a lot to do with it, and that was one of the things that got him in trouble with the church. In 1595, he actually communicates with Johann Kepler. And Kepler, who was a avowed Copernican, that's the sun-centered system as opposed to the Ptolemaic, which was the Earth-centered system.
Exactly.
Right. The sun-centered system. He was a Copernican by the time he wrote to Kepler wrote to him. Kepler admonished Galileo and said to him, "Look, you have to come out as the great astronomer that you are, and tell everybody what's good about this the Copernican theory." And Galileo said, "I'm not going to do that because I will be ridiculed by my fellow professors." Not because he was afraid of the church, by the way, which is important also. Let me move ahead there. We had another slide there. By the way, while he was at the University of Padua, he created the one-horse pump. He used to go down to the arsenal where the ships were, and he taught them how they could lift a ship out of the water with the use of one foot, with hydraulics, with one horse. And it made him a wealthy man, by the way. Moving on to another, there's a picture of Johannes Kepler. Kepler, of course, if any of you know astronomy, he was the one that created the laws of planetary motion. And Kepler was well-renowned at that time, too. And Kepler said to Galileo, like I said, "Come out." And Galileo said, "I'm not going to do it." And apparently, because of the admonishment, Galileo didn't write to Kepler again until 1610. So that was an interesting thing. Now, to get a little bit more with his life, in 1599 he meets his wife, not his wife, his common-law wife. Her name was Maria Gamba, and he never married her. And then in 1601 he started to have children with her. And that's an important feature of, if I can move along there for a second. I've put this slide in there because this is important to germane to the discussion. The fellow in the middle there, Giordano Bruno, was a monk that was arrested by the Inquisition for having heretic views, and was burned at the stake in 1600. And as a matter of fact, Roberto Bellarmine, that you can see on the slide there on the right, was a cardinal who was the head of the Inquisition from about 1595 to his death in 1620. Very important man, probably would have been Pope had he not been outlived by the existing Pope. But Bellarmine had actually signed the order for Bruno's death.
And then Bruno was burned at the stake.
Was burned at the stake because of his heretical views. So the 1595 letter didn't have anything to do with it, because he wasn't afraid of being burned at the stake. He was afraid of being ridiculed by his fellow professors. And the other crucial individual in this point was this Maffeo Barberini, who was the cardinal that was a good friend of Galileo's, eventually became Pope Urban VIII, who tried him, by the way. But during this time, he legitimatized his son. The two children were born out of wedlock, so they weren't marriageable. So they had to go into a convent, and they couldn't go into a convent until they were 13 or 14. And Barberini got them into the convent when they were 6. So, but he was a key guy to him. He became a patron of Galileo as well. So that's a very important feature.
Now, Galileo did a lot of work with the telescope, and while he didn't invent it, he certainly did a lot with it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I will. He observed Kepler's star in 1605, or 1604 rather, gave lectures on it, and was talking about how the heavens may change contrary to Aristotle. Well, he goes along and so on and forth, and in 1608 he hears about Hans Lippershey's a telescope. Hans Lippershey was a Dutch-German oculist who created a telescope for military use to see the ships on the horizon, because ships weren't motorized. They were on sail, and if you could look at them soon enough, you could get out of town or you could prepare for it, right?
Right.
And he made a lot of money doing that. That was really very important to them, by the way, economically. Well, Galileo said, this sounds good to me. So what he did is he created a 3-power telescope, but increased it to 5 and then increased it to 8. And he was, we can go right through to this next part here. That's a little bit about his daughter and Barberini, but we can move right on to, this is Kepler's star, which was the remnants of it. And there's another point there. He invented this telescope. He took the telescope and he didn't use it at first because he wanted a patent on it. They wouldn't give him a patent on it, but they increased his pay for it.
Okay.
And then what happens is in November, he decides to point the telescope to the moon. And actually it was in November of 1609 till about December 17th or 18th. He looked at the moon and he saw that it was not a perfect sphere and it had mountains and everything like that. And it started to really get now to the point where he was going to say, look, I'm a Copernican and I'm going to tell everybody I'm a Copernican. And that is, and of course, and the key was that in the beginning of January, he sees the three of the 4 moons of Jupiter, January 7th. And then on the 13th, he sees the last one and he notices that they're going around Jupiter. Well, the church says everything goes around the earth.
Very interesting. Ken, we're going to have to take a short break where we're going to take a look at a public service announcement.
Great.
We'd like you also to visit our website that you can see down there at the bottom of your screen. And after this public service announcement, we'll be back with more Galileo. Stay tuned.
Movie star heroes get to make some pretty amazing saves. Hi, I'm Kelly Hu for RAD, recording artists, actors, and athletes against drunk driving. I'm here to tell you about an easy way to be a hero in real life. Keep a friend who's been drinking from getting behind the wheel. Even if they've only had 1 or 2, they're more likely to cause a crash and injure or even kill someone. So take their keys, call a cab, or drive them home. Remember, friends don't let friends drive drunk.
Welcome back. We're here in studio with Ken Burton, a member and past president of the Warren Astronomical Society, and we're talking about the great Italian scientist and astronomer, Galileo. Ken, we covered a number of interesting topics in the first part of our program, and now we're going to move ahead to the later part of Galileo's life, including the part where he got in trouble with Rome.
Okay.
Can you fill us in on that?
I'll go with it. The first slide there will be germane to it. This briefly, in 1605, he became the teacher, the tutor of Cosimo II de' Medici. They became his patrons, and this was very, very important to it. And I just wanted to touch on that because they are crucial to the story as the time goes on. And in here we have this Hans Lippershey and his patent itself going forward, and that's a picture of Hans Lippershey as well. And I'm moving along, and this is actually the telescope that he actually invented, Galileo, and he took it to the tower there to show the military use of it and was rewarded handsomely for it. And this is the part where we talked about the moon that he looked at, and he put it into Sidereal Messenger along with the notes about the Jupiter's moons. And this is where he really got into the issues that eventually got him into trouble. And I'll move back over here. This is just a picture of the moon, but he also noticed that the stars were very, very numerous and that their parallax was great. So he said they're probably outside of everything, and how can the sun shine its light on it if they're way out there? You know, so those were crucial to his telescopic work that moved to it later on. Now, what happened was he was honored in 1611 by 3 banquets. One was given by Federico Sezzi, and Federico Sezzi was a great publisher, and he was the starter of the Lindsay Academy, which was a great honor if you became a part of that. And he entered Galileo as a member of the Academy. In addition to that, that's where the telescope was named, by the way, but that takes much longer than we need to go. But then he was also entered into a banquet with the cardinals and mathematicians at the Collegio Romano, which was a Jesuit university. And these guys were right behind him right from the very beginning, including Barberini, who thought that he was the greatest thing since rain, really, seriously. And there's a certain point in time when Galileo starts to tee off, if you want to call it that, the Jesuits. This is what happens. He's a good friend of this Christoph Clavius, who was a great astronomer, but also a Jesuit. But then all of a sudden what happens is he takes a look at the sun, and he sees the sunspots. And Christoph Scheiner, another Jesuit, says that the sunspots, because the sun is perfect, have got to be planets moving in front of the sun. Well, a planet, you know, if you take a look at the planets, Mercury takes 3 hours to go across, Venus takes 6. These would take 15 days to get across. And Galileo said, the parallax tells me that they're on the surface. And he started to get Christoph Scheiner very angry. As time went along, in 1616, which is a crucial point, the Pope gets reports from these other Jesuits that what he's preaching and what he's saying is against Scripture, and Copernicanism is against what Aristotle said, that the Earth is the center and doesn't move. So Pope Paul V gets Galileo to meet with Roberto Bellarmine, who was again the head of the Inquisition, and Bellarmine says to him, the Pope says that you're going to have to talk about Copernicanism only in theory. You can't say it's the law. He said, because it's against Scripture. And Galileo says to him, pretty much, I know that you put Bruno to the stake. I'm not going there. So he just said, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to say anything more. I'm going to only use it theoretically. Well, there was another priest that was there named Segesi, who set up a report that started an injunction against him. And sometimes people said that it was falsified. There were all kinds of issues that went along with that. But Bellarmine wrote him a letter that said that you're cool. And then he met with the Pope Paul, and Pope Paul said, you're just fine, and you're come out of this fine, and we're not going to ban you, we're not going to give you a hard time. We are going to take Copernicus' book, De Revoluti, and we're going to correct it, is what they did. So they suspended it. It took them 5 years to correct it, but they did, in fact, correct it, as it were. Mm-hmm. So Galileo came out very nicely. And Galileo wasn't going to say anything for the next couple of years. All of a sudden now, 3 comets appear in 1618. Aristotle said that comets were part of the Earth, went up into the sky, and caught on fire. Galileo said, that's ridiculous. They're outside the moon. It's not the case. And there were mathematicians from the Collegio Romano who stated that, no, he's wrong, we're right, they are the fire, and that's what they are. And he wrote a treatise that said to them, they're out of their minds, the Jesuits, and they don't have it right, and Christoph Schreiner's an idiot. Pretty much, that's what he said. And that's when he alienated all the Jesuits. Well, now they wanted to get him. So what happened was a sequence of events. Cosimo dies. During this period of time, he writes a letter to Christina, the Duchess Christina, telling him why Copernican doesn't interfere with the Scripture. He says he quoted another Jesuit that said that the Scripture teaches us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go, And he tries to do it, and the Jesuits say, well, look, we're theologians. We'll teach theology. You teach mathematics. That's your thing. I said, leave us alone. You're stepping on our feet. Well, it really got them upset. And he wrote the Assayer, and then the best and the worst thing happens to Galileo. In 1623, Gregory, who had succeeded Paul, dies, and Urban, Maffeo Barberini, his friend, becomes Pope. He runs to Rome and he says to the Pope, he says, look, he says, I need you to get me out of that injunction of 1616, or that letter, and let me do something. And Urban says, no, he says, it's Scripture and you can't go against it, but I'll let you do it hypothetically. So then it's like a license. It's opened up, and all of a sudden Galileo, and by the way, we don't need any more of the slides because I can wing this without it.
All right.
He goes to him and he says, that's great. So now he goes and he writes the thing called Dialogue. Dialogue is the book on 2 worlds. And he's supposed to treat it hypothetically, but he doesn't. And what he does is literally, what he says is, in the book, he creates three people. He creates 3 people. He creates Salviato, which is Galileo and Copernicus. He produces Segredo, which is an open-minded reader. And he produces Simplicio. And it's Simplicius, named after a well-known ancient Aristotelian commentator. And of course, the Aristotle Simplicio is talking about church doctrine, and Copernicus is talking about Copernicanism. And in fact, what he does is he puts this book together, and the Jesuits see it, and they get upset, particularly Scheiner, go to the Pope and say, Pope, you're Simplicio. That's what he says. He duped you, okay? And that's when his problems happen. Now, there were 5 things that happened to Galileo real quickly. I'll get over them real quickly. The first thing that got him into trouble was, let's go talk about those. The 5 things were, Sezzi dies in 1630. Sezzi was his friend who was a publisher. So he would have cleared the book. Second thing that happens is the Black Plague occurs. So you can't take the whole book to Rome to get it approved, which he has to do by the Inquisition, right? So the Inquisition says, okay, well, I'll tell you what you can do. You can take the preface and the conclusion and send it to us for our approval, and you can take it to the Florentine head of the Inquisition, a guy named McCarty or whatever his name was. It's not important to the name. But this guy never reads it and gives it a stamp, and they throw it together. He goes and he has it published, and it's the rage of Europe. The other thing that happened is the church is having trouble with the Calvinists all the way through Europe. And most important of all, they're having a lot of trouble with the Spanish Catholics. Spanish Catholics are ready to get out of the church. They want to leave. And they're saying, you got to get tougher with heretics. And that's what happens to Galileo, along with his problem with Christoph Scheiner. And Scheiner comes forward and says, you got to get him, and the Pope Urban says, yes, I was duped, and now he's been in the papacy for now 8 years, and he's got a little bit of himself image involved, and he says, you know, I'm the Pope now, and you've wronged me. So Galileo is an old man by this time, says, I can't come to Rome, I'm sick, I'm old, and the Medicis, they write a letter about it, and his doctors write a letter about it. Urban won't have it. Urban says, you're either coming to Rome voluntarily or you're coming in chains. He goes to Rome, he's put before the Inquisition, and they convict him of at first they were going to make a deal with him that says he made an error, and they were going to pat him on the back and say, you know, don't do this, and so on and so forth. But the Jesuits were so mad at him at this time that they said, you got to do something about him. And he brought him before there, and what happened was he was convicted, and he had to abjure, kneel down and abjure. They had made an announcement to the mathematicians of all the universities and everything like that, and then they said, well, we're not going to torture you or anything like that, which they could have. But what we're going to do is we're going to imprison you in your home in Florence, and that's what we're going to do. And that's basically it. I've really run through it very, very fast, but just the same.
It sounds like Galileo's problems were as much political as they were religious theory.
Exactly.
And you just, as you said earlier, ticked off the wrong people.
He really did. And the fact of the matter is they were really laying for him, is what they were doing. They were ready for it. Whatever he did, they were going to get him. Because he wasn't a diplomat. You know.
No, he was a great mathematician and astronomer, but it sounds like his political senses weren't too good. Ken, I want to thank you for coming on our show today to fill us in on the life and times of Galileo. I hope that all of you out there have enjoyed this presentation in the 400th year of Galileo's discoveries. And after this list of upcoming events, we'll be back with What's Up in Tonight's Sky. We'll be back.
What's up in the night sky for February 2010? Let's start with the moon. The moon phases are pretty much on the weekends. The first quarter, it's the last quarter, the third quarter moon, is on Friday, February 5th. The new moon, which you won't be able to see, is on the 13th, on Saturday. The first quarter moon is then on Sunday the 21st, and it happens to cross near the Pleiades star cluster, which I'll get to a little later as well. On Sunday, the 28th, we have the full moon. Now, it's a full moon on the very last day of the month, but it's not a blue moon because the moon takes about 29 days to go around the Earth, and complete all of the phases. And there are only 28 days in February, so no blue moon for us. This month, we lose Jupiter finally. Jupiter's been hanging in the south or in the west just before sunset for a while now, but the sunsets are coming later, the days are getting longer, and Jupiter is progressing toward the sun, so we lose it. But just as we lose it, lose it for good, which is in the middle of the month, we gain Venus. So we started with bright Jupiter, and we're going to get even brighter Venus. Now, on the 29th of January, which was just a few days ago, Mars was at opposition. That means that the Sun and the Earth and Mars are all lined up, and Mars is as close as it gets to the Earth in its orbit. And it does this every a little over 2 years. How big is Mars going to look? Well, you're going to need a telescope with 145 power, 145x, in order for Mars to appear as large as the full moon does naked eye, which means you're not going to see that much. You're going to see the biggest structures, the biggest light and dark areas. Usually you'll see the polar ice cap. This picture was taken by Viking in 1980, and it's actually stitched together thousands of images, high-resolution images. Not even the Hubble Space Telescope gets an image that's this good. But Valles Marineris is a wonderful sight, no matter how you get to look at it. So Mars is in Cancer. It is moving toward Gemini from Leo. It is moving to Gemini from Leo. Cancer is not a very bright constellation, and so if you see Mars, that must be Cancer that it's in. Now you saw in the Finder chart for Mars that Orion was in the upper right, and the belt of Orion, if you follow the belt of Orion down and to the left, you get to the brightest star in the sky, Sirius, other than the Sun, of course. And if you follow it up and to the right, you get to M45, the Pleiades star cluster, which I mentioned earlier. Saturn, at the beginning of the month, rises at 10 p.m., and at the end of the month, it rises at 8 p.m., so it's getting easier and easier to see. And it's in the constellation Virgo, having just come from Leo. Vesta is wandering around Leo this month, and by mid-month, it'll be very close to the star Algebra. So that's what's up in the night sky for February. Let's go observing.